My name is Natasha. I am 28 years old. I was 13 the night my childhood ended. Though no one announced it, no dramatic music played, no warning echoed through the walls of our small house. There was only the sound of my parents arguing in low, venomous whispers, the rustle of suitcases, and the strange, suffocating silence that followed. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, hugging my knees, trying to convince myself it was another one of their fights. Another storm that would pass by morning. But morning came, and the house was hollow. No breakfast smells, no footsteps, no voices. Just a folded note on the kitchen counter with my name written on it like an afterthought. They didn't say goodbye. They didn't say sorry. They said they needed a fresh start, as if I were clutter they couldn't carry. I didn't cry at first. Shock is a colder, quieter thing. I wandered through rooms that suddenly felt foreign, touching objects as if they might explain what had happened. By evening, fear settled in. I had no money, no plan, no idea how long before someone realized I had been left behind. Hunger eventually forced me to call the one person my parents rarely spoke about, but always resented: my uncle. He was my mother's older brother, wealthy, distant, the family success story everyone pretended not to envy. I expected hesitation, questions, maybe even rejection. Instead, after a long pause, he simply asked for my address. When his driver arrived, I felt both relief and shame, like I was being rescued from a disaster I had somehow caused. His house was enormous, the kind of place I had only seen in magazines, with marble floors that reflected my uncertainty, and ceilings so high my voice seemed to disappear into them. He didn't hug me. He wasn't that type of man. But he gave me a room, clean clothes, a sense of safety that felt unreal. That night, lying in a bed bigger than my entire old bedroom, the reality struck me harder than any tears could. My wealthy uncle took me in when my parents left me behind, at 13. Those words would later become the headline of my life. But at the time, they were just a fragile truth I clung to. Living with him was not easy, but it was structured, disciplined, and oddly comforting. He believed in rules, in education, in earning one's place. There was no pity in his eyes, only expectation. I went from a forgotten child to someone who had to prove she deserved the space she occupied. At first, I resented it. I was grieving abandonment, not applying for a job. But slowly, I understood his silent lesson. The world would not bend for my pain. If I wanted stability, I had to build strength. Years passed, and the anger that once burned uncontrollably inside me transformed into something sharper, more focused. I studied relentlessly, driven by a mix of gratitude and a desperate need never to feel powerless again. My uncle watched from a distance, occasionally offering advice that sounded harsh but proved painfully accurate. He never spoke badly about my parents. He never asked me to forgive them. He simply acted as if they were irrelevant, and in doing so, taught me a dangerous kind of independence. By the time I entered university, I was no longer the scared girl he had taken in. I was determined, cautious, and deeply aware that everything I had could vanish if I became complacent. Success, I learned, is often born from fear. Yet despite the comfort of my new life, a quiet wound remained. No calls came from my parents. No apologies, no attempts to explain. It was as though I had been erased from their story. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself family was defined by actions, not blood. Still, certain nights carried a familiar ache. Memories sneaking in through the cracks of my carefully constructed confidence. My uncle aged as the years moved forward, though he retained his commanding presence and relentless work ethic. He became not just my guardian, but my anchor, the constant figure in a life that had once been violently unstable. People admired him, feared him, envied him. Few truly knew him. To the world, he was a powerful businessman. To me, he was the man who stepped in when everyone else stepped away. I built my career, my identity, my sense of worth under the shadow of his influence. And then, just when life felt predictable, fate began preparing its cruel twist, one I could not yet see but would soon define everything. 15 years after that silent morning of abandonment, the ghosts I thought were gone forever would begin to stir, setting into motion a chain of events that would lead to a moment I could never have imagined. 15 years later, Mom arrived. At his will, reading expecting millions, until I shut her up. But before that reckoning, before the shock, Before the lawyer, who would later be described as having arrived in horror, there was the long, complex journey of a girl learning that kindness and power often wear the same face, and that abandonment can either destroy you or forge you into someone unrecognizable. 15 years passed like a storm that never truly left, only changed shape. I built a life brick by brick, fueled by discipline and the quiet, unspoken bond between my uncle and me. He remained the single unwavering force in my world, a man of intimidating presence and ruthless clarity, yet also the one person who never treated me like a burden or a mistake. When he fell ill, the shift was so subtle at first that I refused to see it. He still went to work, still barked orders, still dismissed concern with a wave of his hand. But illness is patient, and power offers no immunity. Watching him weaken felt like witnessing a mountain slowly erode. The day he died, the house that once symbolized my rescue became unbearably silent again, echoing with a cruel familiarity that dragged me back to being 13. Grief hit me with a force I was unprepared for. This was not abandonment. This was loss, and it carved through me in ways I had no defenses against. Yet, even in death, my uncle remained who he had always been, methodical, precise, leaving nothing to chance. The will reading was scheduled swiftly, conducted in a cold, polished office that smelled of leather and inevitability. I arrived with a heart heavier than I thought possible, expecting legal formalities, distant relatives, quiet tension. What I did not expect, what I could never have prepared for, was her. My mother. The woman who had walked out of my life without a backward glance now stood near the window, dressed in expensive fabric, her posture radiating confidence as if she belonged there, as if time had erased every unforgivable choice she had made. The shock nearly stole my breath. For a moment, I wondered if grief had fractured my mind. But she was real, painfully real, her eyes scanning the room with calculation rather than remorse. She looked at me not like a daughter rediscovered, but like an obstacle. The years had changed her face, but not the cold distance behind it. I learned quickly why she had come. Word of my uncle's wealth had reached her, and greed had done what love never did. It brought her back. There was no apology, no trembling reunion, no acknowledgement of the 13-year-old she had left behind. Only a brittle smile and an assumption that blood entitled her to fortune. The lawyer began reading, his voice steady, indifferent to the emotional minefield surrounding him. Assets, properties, investments, my uncle's empire laid out in clinical language. I could feel my mother's anticipation thickening the air, her confidence growing with every mention of wealth. Then the shift came, subtle yet seismic. My uncle's decisions, his final instructions, each word detonating expectations. The room's energy changed instantly. My mother's expression, once smug and assured, flickered with confusion, then disbelief, then something far closer to panic. Because my uncle had known. Known her character, known her absence, known exactly who had stood by him and who had not. And as realization dawned, the truth stood naked and brutal. 15 years later, Mom arrived. At his will, reading expecting millions. Until I shut her up, not with cruelty, not with theatrics, but with the undeniable force of reality itself. The fortune she had mentally claimed was never hers. The man she had barely acknowledged had ensured that. Her voice, sharp and rising, shattered the stunned silence, accusations spilling out in desperation. It was then that the lawyer, who had arrived in horror at the escalating tension, intervened with calm authority, reiterating the legality, the finality, the impossibility of dispute. I watched my mother's composure collapse under the weight of a lifetime of choices returning like a verdict. There was no triumph in my chest, no joy, only a strange, heavy stillness. This was not revenge. This was consequence. The woman who once abandoned me now faced the undeniable proof that my uncle's loyalty had never been for sale. In that sterile office, surrounded by documents and stunned witnesses, the power dynamic of my entire life inverted. She had come expecting wealth. She left with nothing but the echo of doors she had slammed shut years ago. And as I stepped out into the daylight, the magnitude of it all settled over me. Not the inheritance, not the money, but the final, irreversible confirmation that the man who took me in when my world collapsed had seen me, believed in me, and chosen me in ways my own parents never did. If this story moved you, if you felt the weight of abandonment, resilience, and the quiet justice of life's reckoning, then join this journey by subscribing to the channel. There are more stories waiting, more truths to uncover, and more moments that remind us how strength is often forged in the darkest chapters.